Hello everyone. Welcome back to Flat Earth Channel, where you can access the latest US news. Let's start with some information from US-China trade wall. Trump hits China with more tariffs. Global markets sink. US to impose 10% levy on an additional $300 billion of Chinese goods, as Trump says tariff rate may increase further. U.S. President Donald Trump told a rally in Cincinnati that the U.S. will be taxing the hell out of China until Beijing agrees to a trade deal. United States President Donald Trump said he plans to impose a 10% tariff on $300 billion of Chinese imports from September 1st, and could raise tariffs further if China's President-elect Jinping fails to move more quickly to strike a trade deal. The announcement on Thursday extends Trump's trade tariffs to nearly all China's imports into the U.S. and marks an abrupt end to a temporary truce in a trade war that has disrupted global supply chains and roiled financial markets. I think President-elect wants to make a deal, but frankly, he's not going fast enough, Trump said. Trump made the announcement in a series of Twitter posts after his top trade negotiators briefed him on a lack of progress in US-China talks in Shanghai this week. Trump later said if trade negotiations fail to progress, he could raise tariffs further, even beyond the 25% levy he has already imposed on $250 billion of imports from China. And at a Thursday evening rally in Cincinnati, Trump said that until a deal is reached, we will be taxing the hell out of China. The new tariff attack, which Trump said will take effect on September 1st, would have a more direct impact on U.S. consumers because the goods targeted include clothes, toys, cell phones, electronics and other retail items. Trump said in a series of tweets Thursday that China has failed to deliver on promises to buy more U.S. farm goods and to stop the flow of the powerful painkiller fentanyl into the United States. Trade talks are continuing, and during the talks the U.S. will start, on September 1st, putting a small additional tariff of 10% on the remaining $300 billion of goods and products coming from China into our country. This does not include the $250 billion already tariffed at 25%, Trump said. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin returned this week from a brief round of talks in Shanghai, where the two sides failed to announce a major breakthrough in the negotiations. The two sides agreed to meet again in September. Trump's move to increase trade pressure on Beijing comes just a day after the Federal Reserve cut interest rates for the first time in more than a decade. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said the cut was intended to keep the outlook favorable amid signs that trade tensions and slowing global growth are hurting the U.S. economy. Trade is unusual, Powell said Wednesday. There isn't a lot of experience in responding to global trade tensions. So it is something that we haven't faced before, and we're learning by doing. The news hit global financial markets hard. European stock indexes dived by as much as 2%. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 lost as much as 1.9%, falling to a 6-week low, with the basic material sector plunging 3.9%, and the auto and tech sector sliding 2.7%. Earlier, oil prices plummeted 7%, with Brent crude registering the biggest daily percentage drop since February 2016. In the U.S., the benchmark S&P 500, which had been in solidly positive territory on Thursday afternoon, closed down 0.9%. Benchmark U.S. Treasury yields also fell. In Asia, Japanese benchmark share indices fell more than 2%. South Korean shares extended losses after Japan took its own trade restriction move, directed at Korea, with the Kospi index falling 2.2%. Chinese and Hong Kong stocks were also down sharply. U.S. retail associations predicted a spike in consumer prices. Target Corporation tumbled 4.2%, Macy's Inc. fell 6%, and Nordstrom Inc. was down 6.2%. Asked about the impact on financial markets, Trump told reporters, "I'm not concerned about that at all. Moody's said the new tariffs would weigh on the global economy at a time when growth is already slowing in the U.S., China and the Eurozone. The tariffs may also force the U.S. Federal Reserve to again cut interest rates to protect the U.S. economy from trade policy risks, experts said. The U.S. Central Bank cut its main interest rate by 0.25 percentage point on Wednesday, its first reduction in more than a decade. Raising tariffs would lower the prospects of a deal rather than expedite it, China's Global Times newspaper said. Beijing would focus more on efforts to survive a prolonged trade war, USChina, editor-in-chief of the Communist Party-backed newspaper, said on Twitter. New tariffs will by no means bring closer a deal that the U.S. wants. It will only make it further away, Hu said. Frustrated with China, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin briefed Trump on their first face-to-face meeting with Chinese officials since Trump met 11 at the G20 summit at the end of June and agreed to a ceasefire in the trade war. When my people came home, they said, "We were talking. We have another meeting in early September." I said, "That's fine, but until such time as there's a deal, we'll be taxing them," Trump told reporters. A source familiar with the matter said Trump grew frustrated and composed the tweets shortly after Lighthizer and Mnuchin told him China made no significant movement on its position. Previous negotiations collapsed in May, when U.S. officials accused China of backing away from earlier commitments. U.S. business groups in China expressed disquiet over the latest round of U.S. tariffs. The USChina Business Council said on Friday it was concerned the action will drive the Chinese from the negotiating table, reducing hope raised by a second round of talks that ended this week in Shanghai. "We are particularly concerned about increased regulatory scrutiny, delays in licenses and approvals, and discrimination against U.S. companies in government procurement tenders," said the USChina Business Council's President Craig Allen in an email. Kirk Gibbs, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, urged both sides to keep talking. Gibbs said that as market access in China remains unnecessarily restricted, the United States should continue its dialogue with Beijing, and also work with like-minded countries to persuade China that fair and reciprocal trade and investment benefits all. Crops and drugs. Trump said Beijing had failed to stop sales of the synthetic opioid fentanyl to the U.S., as it had promised to do. He also said Beijing had not fulfilled a goodwill pledge to buy more U.S. agricultural products. Trump has failed to make good on a goodwill gesture he said he would make after the G20 meeting to relax restrictions on sales to Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. Trump had been pressing 11 to crack down on a flood of fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances from China, which U.S. officials say is the main source of a drug blamed for most of more than 28,000 synthetic opioid-related overdose deaths in the U.S. in 2017. China had pledged that from May 1 it would expand the list of narcotics subject to state control to include the more than 1,400 known fentanyl analogs, which have a slightly different chemical makeup, but are addictive and potentially deadly, as well as any new ones developed in the future. The U.S. Department of Agriculture on Thursday confirmed a small private sale to China of 68,000 tons of soybeans in the week ended on July 25. It was the first sale to a private buyer since Beijing offered to exempt 5 crushers from the 25% import tariffs imposed more than a year ago. Soybean futures opened lower on Thursday as traders shrugged off the purchase because of the small volume involved, and losses accelerated after Trump's tweets. Retail impact. The new tariffs will jack up prices for consumers at the start of the back-to-school buying season, 4 large retail trade associations said on Thursday. President Trump is, in effect, using American families as a hostage in his trade war negotiations, said Matt Priest, president of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. Stephen Lamar, executive vice president of the American Apparel and Footwear Association, said his group's members were shocked that Trump had not allowed the resumed U.S.-China trade talks to proceed further before acting. The measure will hit U.S. consumers far harder than Chinese manufacturers, which produce 42% of apparel and 69% of footwear purchased in the U.S., Lamar said. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe our channel to update the latest news in America.